Welcome to the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with our good friends at Operation Smile. We hope to create 100 new smiles through our partnership. To help us reach our goal, please donate at emearecruitment.com/operation-smile. In this episode, we welcome Michaela Dedic, Global Diversity and Inclusion Leader at Novartis. She explains why a business should invest in D&I to create an inclusive culture.
So hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As my colleague Rose mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Michaela onto the podcast today. So I guess given that the podcast is in partnership with this charity called Operation Smile that we work with, I always like to start the conversation off in a fairly light-hearted manner, Michaela. So maybe what was the last thing that made you smile?
Hi, good morning, Paul. Great talking to you today. And so what made me smile this morning actually was that I opened the door of my balcony and I saw a bird picking on my plant, which I have just planted last weekend. And I chased the bird to leave my plant. And after a few seconds, again, the bird came back and picked again on my plant, and we had a little fight. At the end, I think he still picks on my plant, which I think is okay. But this really made me smile this morning.
So is gardening something that you've taken up over the last sort of 2.5, 3 years of the working from home situation?
I think I did. As many other people somehow started to take care more of their garden, I also investing more time with my plants, and I'm really enjoying it. So it gives me somehow peace, and I can calm down.
No, and I'm going to make a rather shameless and seamless link into growing plants and growing and developing people, because I know that's something that's you have a passion for, and you love the mentoring side of your role, both in work and outside. And I suppose there are similarities, looking after any plant in the garden. You give them a bit of love and care and watch them grow, as same as with people as well. And I thought, one of the questions I was going to ask you throughout the conversation, but it probably seems a good time to ask it now, really, is what do you really like about the mentoring and leadership side of things?
Yeah, it's a good question, Paul, and I like the picture to gardening, because I do see similarities. Yeah, because it's about growing people, and as in gardening, you need to take care of the people in your organization and also outside your organization. I think it's a lot to, first of all, to listen to the dreams these people have, how they want to grow, how they want to develop, and then to define paths together, how to get there, what capabilities they maybe need to build to develop and the role they want to do in the future. Sometimes it's also, of course, helping them to navigate certain situations, to provide some experiences, to connect them to people and to other organizations. Sometimes it depends. But I think in many ways you are doing similar things when you take care of your plants. So you're providing the right soil. You're providing enough light and sun to the plants, and you just take care. So I think it's just great to see when I mentor people how they are growing and how they are developing. So it's rather fulfilling.
No, and I think within the answer there, you mentioned listening and how important that is. And we know from having other guests from Novartis on the podcast as well, that listening is an essential part of the culture that Novartis currently have and have really successfully built over a period of time, but it's especially been noted during the COVID period. And clearly, as HR leader, you've had an influence on that. I mean, what do you think you've taken from that in the way that HR leaders can influence a culture in an organization? You know, how do you feel the impact can be made through HR into a culture?
Yeah, so look, I think HR has a big role to play when we talk about culture change. And I think the simplest way HR can influence the culture is to take an active part and actually an active lead in developing the culture together with the executive teams, with the multiple stakeholders in the company and across the businesses to evaluate the current culture, to assess the potentials or maybe gaps, and to create a strategic plan for the culture. And listening is actually an important part on this journey. And sometimes we maybe under-evaluate the power of listening because maybe we are taught to maybe go too fast into providing solutions. But particularly when we talk about changing a culture or adapting a culture, listening to your partners is incredibly important.
No, it's really true. And I mean, I think it is one of those skills that's really underestimated and undervalued, you know, but you see people when they are great listeners, you can tell that their focus is with the person and, you know, the individual they're with gets so much more from that conversation or that meeting than if you're sitting in a room and you can tell that somebody's got one eye on email, one eye on social media, you know, they're thinking about what they're going to have for lunch. You can tell if their focus it isn't there. And I think, you know, it's hard, but it's a hard skill to really develop. And I think, you know, and even more so given the challenges of not being able to see people as much as we've been used to over recent years. So how have you had to adapt your style given the fact that, you know, obviously, you know, until recently, most of the meetings have been remote. So have you had to sort of adapt the style to that and what learnings have you taken from this period?
Yeah, definitely. I had to adapt my style during the last 2 years. I think, as many of us in the beginning, I didn't realize or maybe didn't want to realize that the virtual way of working will become a continuum for almost 2 years. Yeah. But at some point, there was a point where I realized, okay, this will go on for a while, and I also need to adapt the way of working and connecting with people. And I think one key learning for me was to really set clear boundaries, how I'm working. Firstly, to set physical boundaries, and what I did is to set up my home office, also in a different room where I'm only working. I know this is maybe a privilege because not everyone has the opportunity to have our own office, home office, but I think this was important. This was important to me. I also had to set up time for myself, for physical exercise, for some mental health work, for my family. But as well, I started to reach out to my colleagues and friends and just set up time for us to talk, not to talk about certain projects or activities we are doing, just to check in with them and asking, hey, how are you really doing? And I think this was very important. Though now I'm really happy that we are able to be back again and to see people, because I do feel there is always a certain energy in a face-to-face meeting. So very, very glad that this is possible again.
No, and I think you mentioned now, I mean, it's, you know, the changes that you had to make in work. I mean, for everybody, it affected them at home as well. And I think in the early part of this remote working, a lot of people really struggled because they were trying to live their life as they had done previously and work the same way and live the same way. But I think there was a bit of a reality check fairly early on that wasn't going to be possible because you're just going to burn out. And I think most people, you know, opened their Outlook diary with dread every morning and saw back-to-back video calls for 10 hours a day and couldn't get anything else done. But it takes quite a lot of, you know, discipline and commitment to kind of get out of that routine, you know. But by the sounds of it, you by setting these clear boundaries, having the home office in a different room to the rest of your house, so you had that kind of mental cut-off point between work and family time. That those sounded like really key things that helped you to get through this period, really.
Yes, it did, and of course, things not always work perfectly. Yeah. And it's really a continuous journey I went through together with my family to keep the balance. And I think we all went through these days where we had worries, how things will go, how will the situation evolve, etc. But I think at least in my environment and with my family, we really were able to keep the spirits up and to get through this difficult time. But it's not something, at least not for me, which happened overnight. Yeah, so setting the clear boundaries, it took me a lot of thinking and also experimenting what works for me. And I think we are all different. So I think what maybe works for me doesn't work for others. But overall, I do believe that setting boundaries is and was an important topic.
No, I think you mentioned there that you know, having the it's almost a journey that you've been on over this time, and relating this actually to your career journey, really. I mean, you've had a fantastic career, and you've been at Novartis since 2016 and seen a range of different things over that time. But obviously now in the global DE&I lead in the business, I thought I'd ask you really what it feels like to be in this position.
That's a good question, Paul. And look, I think first of all, it's just great that Novartis is investing a lot in the D&I space. I think we have recognized how important diversity and inclusion is to drive innovation, to drive continuous business performance, and also to actually help the reputation of a company. And it's actually also the right thing to do. So therefore, I think that's just great. And joining the D&I space was and is still a very interesting and rewarding experience. So therefore, to answer your question, it really feels good to be in D&I today. It's I feel it's also a real privilege to work in this space. I think, of course, diversity inclusion is a long-term commitment. When you start working on your D&I strategy, I think you need to acknowledge that things will not change overnight. So the D&I space, I think, is not a sprint. It's more a marathon you are doing. I think it's, of course, very important to set clear targets and objectives. What do you want to achieve, and by when do you want to achieve? But at the same time, you also need to engage with the company. You also need to shape a common vision. What do you want to do in the D&I space? And this, of course, takes time, but otherwise it's really very rewarding and interesting to be in the D&I space.
Hi everybody, it's Paul Thomas here. I hope that you're well and you're enjoying the podcast so far. Thank you once again for your continued support listening to the podcast. I just wanted to break into the recording to talk to you about a really exciting partnership that EMEA Recruitment has along with Operation Smile. And as founder of EMEA Recruitment, it's an honour and a privilege to announce this partnership. Personally, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so the mission of Operation Smile is something that I have a strong personal connection with. It's not an understatement to say that the dentists and surgeons that helped me were life changers. It's not only about the actual operations that take place, the support and care post and pre-operation are beyond value. And from personal experience, I can only say that I'd not be the confident, happy person I am today without this support. I want to help children experience the support and care and skill that I experienced on my journey, and hope that we can do this along with Operation Smile. Every 3 minutes, a child is born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, and the mission of Operation Smile is to provide help and support to these children through providing 6,000 medical volunteers across 80 countries who are dedicated to help these children with facial conditions, most commonly cleft lip and cleft palate. More than 200,000 children are born with a cleft every year, and they are often unable to speak, eat, socialise or even smile. However, it can take as little as 45 minutes and cost just €180 or 182 francs for Operation Smile to provide a child with life-changing surgery. Now, in partnership with Operation Smile, EMEA Recruitment is raising valuable funds and aiming to create 100 new smiles to support the organisation to provide free surgeries for children and young adults all over the world. Please help us by donating through the link in the bio, or get in touch to see how your company can help get involved too. For the moment, I'll leave you to carry on listening to the rest of the podcast, but if there's anything I can do in terms of answering any questions or finding out how you can help and support EMEA Recruitment and Operation Smile, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
And what's interesting within that, and I think it always interests me when I speak to anybody who's been successful in the field of HR, because in other disciplines, like if you look at, let's say, finance or supply chain, for example, when they're working on big projects, usually there's a results end in mind that is relatively easy to measure. You know, if a finance team is looking to increase the speed of their reporting time, then you can, at the end of a project, you can say, well, yeah, we managed to improve it by a number of days or weeks, and so that you put a tick next to the box, and that's a result. But in HR and especially in things like D&I, as you mentioned, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a long-term commitment, but it's also quite difficult to actually to gauge the success levels, because it's all, majority of this is about soft skills, and even when you get figures, it's hard to ascertain whether it's been 100% successful or not. And I think there's certain characteristics in successful HR people that where they can deal with that situation and understand that they may not get all the plaudits from a result point of view, but they know themselves it's been successful. So I just thought that ask the question, what characteristics do you think have been essential for you to enable you to have this kind of success in the HR field?
Yeah. So, and look, Paul, I think there have been times where I would have wished to be in and work in a space where I can measure my impact in an easier way. No doubt. And look, I think there are opportunities also to measure the impact in D&I or in other parts of HR. Yeah, and I think we as a HR function became also better over the last years to measure our impact. But I agree sometimes it's not as easy and as obvious as in other parts or functions of a company. And I think, first of all, we need to challenge ourselves to find the right KPIs. Yeah. And there are ways to do it. And I don't know whether we will talk about the impact of data and digital in the HR space, but I think there are certainly opportunities here. And if it's not easy to design a KPI immediately, I think what keeps me going is really when I have a clear vision how things should become and look over time. So I think this is what keeps me going. My purpose and the conviction I have for certain topics. I don't know if this makes sense.
No, it does, and I think it's always really interesting to hear, because I mean I think especially diversity and inclusion is such a big topic at the moment, and you know, when you're yourself or anyone else who's leading a big D&I project, I mean you're trying to change the mindset of somebody potentially who has had a kind of mindset for, you know, since they were a child, and that kind of mindset isn't something that's suddenly changed overnight. It comes back to what you were saying earlier, long-term commitments, and you know, there's no projects in many ways that can be where you can say there's a deadline, because you're always looking to try and improve on D&I, and it will be the case for long term, you know. But I think you mentioned yourself the impact of business intelligence and data, and you know, it is an important question really, because it has such an impact on our lives, both at work and at home. And you know, we talked about listening earlier, and the challenges of, you know, so many different forms of technology and data that can move people away from having conversations and actually just turn them into analyzing data all day. But I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of how you feel BI and data is going to change the HR function of the future?
Yeah, I think data is already changing the way how we work and decide to a certain extent. But I also believe that there are many more opportunities. I'm not an expert in this space, but I really see great innovation. Yeah. So when we, for example, look into the talent acquisition space, I think there are already great solutions out there to identify talent. I think data can help us to really drive the productivity of the company, but particularly in the HR space, how we work. Recently, I was attending a discussion where they were sharing how artificial intelligence can help to evaluate conversations in team settings, where they can assess who is talking for how long, and this again can give good insights how certain team dynamics are working. Yeah, I think it also sounded a bit scary. But on the other hand, I really also see the opportunities we have with data, artificial intelligence in the future. And I think we should really embrace these new technologies to make better decisions for our people and for the company.
No, it's true. I mean, I think you mentioned there some of the technology, how it can be used now to add on to video calls and Teams meetings. We know there's a tool that can be added into an interview room online, and it can almost do a psychometric test on the candidate who's being interviewed, but just by looking at the words they use, the movements they make with the hands, the eye contact with the camera, and so on, and it can add a lot of value to a recruitment process and helping to analyze the right people. I mean, I think it can move, I suppose, the decisions away from a gut feeling. That often we'll have clients will make a decision based on the fact they've got a gut feeling that this person's right. So it is usually if they have synergies and with the people around them, and they're a good cultural fits. But I mean, what do you think are some of the key steps to have an efficient and effective recruitment process? Because I suppose we can't really have a conversation with you on a recruitment podcast without talking to you a bit about recruitment. So is there anything from your experience over time that you think that has stood out to you, that has made the process really efficient and effective?
Yeah, good question. And I was asking this question to myself many, many times, Paul. And maybe to give you some of my reflections. I think, of course, it's important to think about the job description. Yeah. So what should the person bring? What kind of experiences, etc. Very often, when I finished the work on the job description, I ended up with a laundry list of things the person should do in this job. And then I really tried to be hard on myself and to take out at least 1/3 of everything I wrote down. Because this is what I very often see in job descriptions is that it's too much. So you very likely won't be able to find somebody who is able to fulfill all the expectations. And I think it's also not always helping to get more clarity on the job. So I think this is important for the recruiting process. And then, of course, how do you interact with the candidates? How do you communicate with the candidates is also quite important. And I think here technology also can help. A good employer brand can help as well to attract people. But I also feel that companies nowadays really need to change sometimes also the way how they communicate with candidates. I also think that we sometimes need to streamline our interview process. I think many of us have been in processes where there were, even more than 10 people involved. And I think, though I understand that you want to get the perspective from different people in the organization, we need to be mindful. We need to be mindful on this. And then I think the most important point for me is that we are building a pipeline. Yeah. So why are we always starting from the scratch again when we look for somebody? Yeah. Why not having a talent pool of great candidates who we know from our talent selection, which we can contact and make it a shorter process, a more targeted process. And I think here I still see a lot of room for improvement, to create these talent pipelines so that we are not always restarting the process when we look for people.
No, it's really interesting because I think a lot of these things go hand in hand as well. I mean, I think if you have a strong brand that is reinforced through the whole interview process, whether it's to the person who ends up getting the job offer or whether it's someone who is rejected before even getting an interview. I mean, as long as it is done in the right way, then the brand of the client remains strong, and then you build up that talent pipeline, because you know that people are invested in the business. They've been treated well, even though they've been rejected, and they'll keep an interest in what's coming up in the future. I think it's something that a lot of organizations really struggle with, especially when there was a period I'd say for the last 5 or 6 years until recently, where you could post a job on LinkedIn and you probably would get hundreds of applications in a very short space of time, but obviously maybe 20% of these people are going to be right, but how do you deal with the 80% of people that aren't, who maybe not right for this role, but they might be right for something that comes up in a few weeks time, and it's trying to get that balance between where you spend the time on investing in the right people for the short term, but also thinking of the ones that you've got in the pipeline for the for the long term side of it as well. And I think you mentioned at the start as well, having the focus of the job description of the person that you're looking to hire, and I think that is also true of the job seekers. I think when you go out on interview, one of the things we try to highlight to people is to be very clear on actually what you really want to do in the next job, because if you have 2 or 3 key elements of the job that you really want to do, which are really important to you, because again, even if they're not right necessarily for the specific opening, you never know what's around the corner with that client, and it paints you in a much better light if you've got that clarity on what you really want to be doing as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes both ways, Paul, it just also takes then a good preparation. And maybe one element which I would add is that when we talk about how we communicate with candidates, with applicants, I think nowadays everything becomes very transparent. Yeah. So what we do, how we communicate. So if an applicant has made a suboptimal or bad experience with a company, very likely this will become public. Yeah, there are many platforms where employees, applicants can share their experiences. So I think therefore it's becoming even more important that when we recruit people, that the process is really a good one.
No, it's true. I mean, I think it's that stat that people are twice as likely to talk about a negative experience than they are about a positive one. So it's always good to to keep that in mind with these processes. And I mean, the question that I always like to ask, but I think it's probably most relevant for HR people, is how does recruitment make you feel? I mean, because there's a lot of people I know in the HR discipline who love recruitment, part of it, and there's also plenty of people I know who would rather not get involved in it, and that is one of the reasons why external recruiters exist, I suppose. But how does recruitment actually make you feel?
I actually like recruitment a lot, and it's becoming very specialized as well over the last 10 years, I think. But I overall really like the recruitment process. For me, it's always a great opportunity to connect with smart people who are interested in the company I'm working for. I get an external perspective as well. How is my company seen? What are the questions people have? And of course, it's for me then often more a conversation also about market development, what is competition doing, how is our company positioned in the market. So I always feel it's very energizing to me. I learn a lot. So therefore, I really like it. And identifying the right person for the job, it's just a great feeling for me.
No, that's good. It's good to hear that you enjoy that part of the role and the things you get out of it. So I think a question along the similar lines, about things you enjoy in the role. It's a question that I think is always interesting to ask, because we tend to find that most people don't choose their careers; the career chooses them. And I was interested to know how people got into their chosen discipline in the first place. So I thought I'd ask you, how you got into human resources in the first place, really, Michaela.
Yeah, it's a good question. So look, I think I haven't had anyone in my family who was working in the HR space. Yeah, so I'm actually the first one. But what I realized at university is that, and this was the case even before that, I'm quite curious about people. So I'm curious about what motivates them, how they're achieving certain things. I was always also the one who was somehow taking care about the team effectiveness, if you want. Yeah, when we did some working groups at university, and at some point I was really then asking myself, hey, would it be something I want to do professionally? At that time, however, HR was still seen as more an administrative function, so therefore I was really struggling. But then I think it was also the time where they've already became quite popular and somehow also shared a new view on HR. And then I thought, okay, wow, that's maybe really a good time to join the function and to grow with the function. And yeah, and I think I never regretted the decision.
Was it a case when you started looking for your first job, you knew you wanted to be in HR, or was it a chance situation that took you that route?
Actually, it was a quite conscious decision. So I applied for HR roles after I finished my degree, and then I just had also the opportunity to join a super interesting company at that time. The job was also quite interesting. I started as a HR assistant of an HR leader. So it was quite the tasks have been quite diverse. And it was for me the opportunity to really get to know the different disciplines in HR. And so this was actually my way into HR, but it was a quite conscious decision.
And I'd say that's actually something we see as maybe more common with HR than some other fields. I think, if people realize that they like working with people, helping people, have a curious mindset that you mentioned there, then the HR discipline is obviously a good direction to go, because that's a core area of the majority of roles in HR. And I think you mentioned that the discipline has changed dramatically over the last 20, 30 years. Nearly every role now has elements of business partnering in it, and you've got to be good with people. That's one of the key things of the discipline. And we've talked a bit about the changes that of the discipline in that question there, but also we talked about BI and data. I mean, what do you think is the biggest challenge or biggest challenges that HR are facing at the moment generally?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, look, I think the challenges for the next years, from my perspective, are certainly to develop the next generation of corporate leaders. I think the profile for corporate leaders, or leaders in general, has changed. And I think we in HR need to get this right for the company. So here I definitely see a focus area. I think it's also indeed to work on the cultural diversity of a company, to work on inclusion and equity. To implement well-being as a business strategy for me is a focus area for companies. I think a lot has happened over the last 2 years, but as we are now returning back to the offices, I think it's something we further need to work on. To actually retain our best employees will be crucial and critical. And then maybe last but not least, how we are managing change in the future. Because I think in the past we always thought about change as a single thing which is happening. But what we are realizing is that change is becoming normal, and things maybe will even change faster in the future. And how we are embedding this thinking in our organization, how are we enabling our people to actually go through these changes is something we need to focus on further in HR.
No, I'd agree. I mean, I think a lot of what you mentioned there comes down to some of the core values and ethics that the companies have in their culture, but also the employees that they show this on a day-to-day basis. And I think what I've seen certainly over the last couple of years more than ever is that when people are evaluating the companies they want to work for, there's much more emphasis now put on the values and the ethics and the D&I initiatives, the sustainability initiatives. These kind of things are, we're asked these questions when people are evaluating what company to look at. And I think I think the good thing from the HR perspective is that because these are mainly HR led projects, it then highlights the need for strong HR people who can be good business leaders and good business partners. And I think you start to see that also having an impact, I think, on some of the moves in the HR market. So I think you probably know Lena Nair, the CHRO of Unilever, moved to be the CEO of a huge multinational business fairly recently, and it one of the first times that's ever happens where a CHRO has gone to a CEO of a huge business. And I think you see now that people are starting to recognize the value and the impact of HR, which I guess can only be a good thing for everybody in the discipline, really.
Yeah, it's just great what is happening in the HR space. And the example you mentioned is also, I think, the first one I'm aware of where somebody moved from a CHRO role to a CEO role. So I hope there will be more moves like this in the future. So let's see. But I think it's HR is well positioned. Though I also believe that we in HR also need to adapt and learn through these changes. I think the capabilities needed are changing, and so therefore I also believe that the profile of an HR leader is changing and will continue to change in the next years to come.
No, it's true. And I think, I actually had a couple of maybe unusual questions to end on. And one of them, I guess, is linked a bit to what you mentioned there with learning and change. I was wondering if you could turn back time and offer the 18-year-old version of yourself one sort of key piece of valuable advice. What would that advice be?
That's a good question. So I don't know whether I would have listened to myself. But look, I think what I would really recommend is have dreams, dream big, dream bold, dream something different. Because I think when you're 18, you're really privileged to do so. Yeah. And I think that's really quite important. I think it's also important to explore the world, to explore different cultures, to really see where your energy goes. Yeah. Of course, at some point, reality will somehow kick in, and you will need to make certain decisions. But at the same time, I would really encourage myself to dream big and to not limit yourself to anything.
I think that's good advice. So yeah, no limits, dream big, and try and get travel in to develop yourself on that side. So I think any younger people listening to this, that's great advice to keep in mind, I would say. And I think the final question of this is. I suppose it's related a bit to the whole podcast we've been talking about, really, in that one of the reasons why we were delighted to have you on the show today is because we know you can inspire the future generation of HR people to join the discipline, and anyone who's in the discipline now can learn from your own experiences as well. But obviously, as much as you're an inspiration for other people, I thought I'd just end the podcast and ask you who's been the biggest inspiration or on your career. I mean, it may not necessarily be one person, could be a few, but if there's any particular people that really inspired you through your career, who might they be?
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's a big question, Paul. I think there have been a few people who really inspired me. And maybe also impacted my career. And if I would need to pick one, I would maybe pick my first business leader as I joined the pharma industry, because he was a very, very purpose-driven person. So he had a big vision, what he wanted to achieve at that time in the biosimilar space. For me, it was also the first experience in the pharma environment. And though I haven't ticked all the boxes from the formal requirements for this job, he actually was convinced that I'm able to do the job. Yeah, he really gave me the opportunity to join the company, to learn new capabilities and new ways of working. Because he just believed in me. And this is really something what impressed me. He was not shy to take this decision and other decisions in a very entrepreneurial way. And last but not least, he was really a leader. He was not a manager, he was a leader, and who was able to create an enormous impact inside and outside the company.
And I guess you see this coming through in your own career over the years. It's going back to what we started talking about at the beginning of the show. Your love of mentoring, leading, developing people, and being a strong inspiration for those around you. So you see the impact that individual had a number of years ago has stayed with you through your career, which is great. It's great to see. So I mean, it's been awesome speaking to you, Michaela. I know we covered a lot in the show, and hopefully it wasn't too taxing for you on a Tuesday morning. But I've really enjoyed it. I know the network will take a huge amount from this as well. And obviously, if they want to connect with you, what's the easiest way any of the listeners can connect with you, Michaela?
Yeah, look, first of all, thanks, Paul. It was really a great talking to you and to share some of my experiences, but also to exchange on some of the key questions we are trying to answer in HR, and how to connect. I think the best way is to connect via LinkedIn. Drop me a message, and normally I get back to you in a reasonable time. And and as said, I'm also always interested to connect with great people and to share some of our thoughts around human resources.
No, that's perfect. So I know the network will be delighted to make a connection with you, and we'll make sure that we put a link to your LinkedIn post when we're doing the podcast promotions as well, to make it as easy as possible. And I guess the last thing to say is, again, just a huge thanks, and hope everything keeps going well, and best of luck with keeping those pests off your plants.
Thank you, Paul. I'll send you a picture.
Thanks, Michaela. Speak to you soon.
See you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you'd like to reach out to Paul or myself, please feel free to send a connection through on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them all at our website, www.emearecruitment.eu.